The house had learned how to be quiet long before Leonard Hale did. It stood on a narrow Upper West Side street, 4 stories of brick and tall windows that looked dignified from the outside and hollow from within. Inside, sound rarely traveled. The floors no longer creaked because Leonard had memorized where to step. The clocks had been removed from most rooms because their ticking irritated him. Even the refrigerator hummed softly, as if it understood it was not welcome to announce itself. Leonard sat most mornings in the same leather chair by the living room window. The leather was cracked now, molded to his frame after decades of use. From there, he could see a slice of the street below. People walking briskly, dogs pulling their owners forward, delivery trucks double-parked with flashing lights. Life moving quickly. Not waiting. At 78, Leonard did not rush for anything anymore. Once, his name had meant something in this city. It still did, technically. Hale Logistics continued to operate efficiently, profitably, impersonally. But Leonard no longer attended board meetings. He watched them on a tablet, muted, the faces of executives moving their mouths like fish behind glass. His body had become unreliable in ways that felt personal. His knees protested stares. His hands shook when he tried to button shirts in a hurry. His hearing came and went selectively, which made conversations feel like puzzles missing pieces. But none of that bothered him as much as the evenings. Evenings were the worst. That was when the house felt too large, too aware of itself. When shadows stretched across walls that once held family photographs, now stored away in drawers because Leonard got tired of explaining who was who to visitors who didn't actually care. His wife had died quietly. No dramatic final words. No hospital scene that movies like to romanticize. Just a call in the early hours, a nurse's voice practiced and careful, and the knowledge that the other side of the bed would remain cold forever. His son had drifted away afterward. At first there were calls, then excuses, then silence that pretended to be busyness. Leonard learned something important during that time. Loneliness doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in. It becomes routine. That was how staff came to fill the gaps. A cook twice a week. A driver when necessary. A nurse who checked in but never stayed long enough to make Leonard feel pitied. And now, finally, a maid. Leonard hadn't wanted one. But the doctor had insisted. The stairs were dangerous. The dust aggravated his lungs. Pride apparently was not a medical concern. The agency sent over a file. Leonard barely glanced at it. Experience. Background checks cleared. The assistant handled the details. Leonard signed where told. On the morning she was due to arrive, Leonard dressed carefully. He chose a sweater he no longer liked but wore anyway because it made him look older. Frilier. He adjusted his posture in the mirror, letting his shoulders slump more than usual. He knew what people did when they thought someone was weak. They revealed themselves. At exactly 9 a.m. the doorbell rang. Leonard did not answer immediately. He waited, counting to 10 in his head, letting the sound echo unanswered. Then he rose slowly and walked to the door with exaggerated effort. The woman standing there was not what he expected. She was younger than he imagined. Early 30s maybe. Dark skin, neatly dressed, posture straight without being rigid. Her hair was pulled back simply. No jewelry except a small watch. Her eyes were alert, taking in details without appearing nosy. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm, not overly cheerful. "I'm Delilah. From the agency." Leonard nodded, pretending to fumble with the lock longer than necessary. "You're on time," he said finally. "Yes, sir." No apology. No nervous laughter. Just a statement. Interesting. Leonard stepped aside to let her in. She wiped her feet without being told. The house seemed to hold its breath. Delilah looked around briefly, then returned her attention to Leonard, waiting for instruction rather than assuming anything. Leonard noticed her hands were steady. "Kitchen's through there," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Living room. Stairs. You'll figure it out." "Yes, sir." She didn't ask questions. didn't overdo politeness. She set her bag down neatly and got to work. Leonard lowered himself into his chair and watched her reflection move faintly in the glass of the hallway mirror. He noted how she handled objects, how she closed drawers quietly, how she didn't touch anything unnecessarily. Most people tried to impress on the first day. Delilah didn't. After a while, Leonard leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Not because he was tired. Because he wanted to see what she would do when she thought he wasn't watching. And as the house settled into its familiar silence, Leonard felt that old instinct stir, the one that told him something was about to be revealed. If you've ever wondered what people do when they believe no one is paying attention, you might want to stay close. And if stories like this draw you in, it's worth subscribing now, because what happens next in this quiet house is anything but ordinary. Leonard slowed his breathing. Footsteps approached, and somewhere behind closed eyes the test began. Delilah did not announce herself when she entered the living room again. Leonard noticed that immediately. Most people cleared their throats, shifted their weight, made some small sound to avoid startling an old man they assumed was fragile. Delilah simply appeared, like someone who trusted silence enough to move within it. Leonard kept his eyes closed. From behind his lids, the room was a blur of light and shadow. He slowed his breathing, letting it deepen, making it just uneven enough to suggest sleep. He'd practiced this over the years. It was easier than people thought. Age gave you cover. He heard the soft scrape of a chair being moved. Then the faint swish of fabric as Delilah crossed the room. She paused near the window. Leonard felt the warmth of sunlight shift slightly as the curtain was adjusted, not closed fully, just angled so the glare wouldn't hit his face. Good, he thought. Let's see where this goes. The vacuum did not come out. Neither did the television. Instead, Delilah started in the corners, using a handheld duster, working methodically. She hummed once, barely a sound, and then stopped as if remembering herself. Leonard smiled inwardly. She thinks I'm asleep. That was the point. Years ago, Leonard had learned something unpleasant about people. They performed when they believed eyes were on them. The moment they thought no one was watching, their real habits slipped out. He had built entire deals on that knowledge. Lost friends because of it. Lost trust too. Now, in the quiet of his own living room, he waited for the slip. Delilah moved closer. He could hear the faint clink of something metal being set down carefully. Keys maybe. Then the whisper of a cloth against wood as she dusted the side table beside his chair. That table held things most people noticed. A framed photo of Leonard and his wife on their anniversary. A small crystal paperweight shaped like a ship. And today, deliberately placed, Leonard's reading glasses. She picked them up. Leonard felt the pause. Just a fraction of a second. People always pause there. He waited for the careless placement. The toss. The quiet annoyance of an object in the way. Instead, Delilah wiped the lenses carefully with the corner of her cloth. Then she folded the glasses and set them back down, aligned neatly with the edge of the table. No sigh. No comment. Leonard felt an unexpected flicker of irritation. Don't be fooled, he told himself. First impressions mean nothing. Still pretending to sleep, he shifted slightly in his chair, letting out a small, deliberate grunt. A test within a test. Would she react? Would she rush? Would she complain? Delilah froze. Mr. Hale? She asked softly. Leonard didn't answer. She waited. Counted his breaths, maybe. Then she moved again, this time slower. She pulled a thin throw blanket from the back of the couch and approached him. Her hands hesitated just above his knees. Leonard could feel her weighing something. Permission. Boundaries. Finally, she draped the blanket over him, careful not to touch skin, just enough to cover his legs. She tucked it slightly so it wouldn't slide off. There, she murmured, mostly to herself. Drafty in here. Leonard almost opened his eyes then. Almost. But he didn't. Delilah stepped back. He heard her footsteps retreat, light but deliberate. The room settled again. Minutes passed. Leonard's mind refused to quiet. He replayed the small actions, searching for cracks. Kindness could be strategy. Professionalism could be training. People learned how to behave around money. He had seen it all. Eventually he woke, blinking slowly, stretching his fingers as if shaking off sleep. Delilah was in the kitchen, wiping the counter. "You don't have to tiptoe around," Leonard said, a touch gruff. "I wasn't sleeping that deeply." She turned. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to disturb you." Her tone wasn't defensive, just factual. Leonard gestured to the blanket. "That wasn't necessary." Delilah hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "It looked like you might be cold." That was it. No justification. No fishing for praise. Leonard studied her more closely now. The faint shadows under her eyes. The way she stood, alert but not tense. Someone used to being careful without being fearful. "Do you have experience with elderly clients?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Some." Another pause. "Do you enjoy it?" he pressed. Delilah considered the question longer than most people would have. "I don't mind it," she said finally. "People are people. They just need different things at different times." Leonard nodded as if that satisfied him. It didn't, because what bothered him was not that she seemed competent. It was that she seemed sincere. That afternoon, Leonard retreated upstairs earlier than usual. From the landing, he listened as Delilah finished her work. No shortcuts. No rushing once she thought he was gone. When the door finally closed behind her, the house felt different. Not warmer. Not brighter. But altered, like a room where furniture had been moved slightly and your body hadn't adjusted yet. Leonard stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing, staring down into the quiet. He told himself it was nothing. Just a maid. Just a job. Yet as evening crept in and shadows lengthened across the walls, Leonard realized something unsettling. He was already planning the next test. And somewhere below, in the silence she'd left behind, the house seemed to be waiting with him. Leonard Hale had never trusted first impressions. They were too easy to manipulate. He learned that early, back when his suits were pressed sharp and his handshake was something people commented on after meetings. Back then he could walk into a room and feel eyes adjust to him. Voices softened. Spines straightened. Everyone wanted to be seen as competent, loyal, harmless. What they showed him was never who they were. So Leonard learned to watch instead of engage. To lean back. To say less. To let people fill silence with their own truths. Age had only refined that habit. The morning after Delilah's first day, Leonard woke before dawn the way he always did. His knees ached. His chest felt tight in that familiar, manageable way. He sat at the edge of the bed for a while, waiting for his body to catch up with his mind. He thought about the blanket. It annoyed him more than it should have. He told himself it was because boundaries mattered. Because employees who crossed them, even gently, often crossed bigger ones later. He had lived through that lesson with partners, with friends, even with family. Still, he left the blanket folded over the chair. By 9 o'clock, Leonard was back in his living room, seated in the leather chair by the window. He positioned his cane within reach. He placed a book on his lap but didn't open it. He waited. Delilah arrived exactly on time again. Her greeting was brief, respectful, the same as the day before. Leonard nodded and said nothing more. He was curious to see if yesterday's behavior had been a performance. He pretended to doze off within minutes. This time he did not even try to hide it. He let his head tilt back. Let his mouth part slightly. Let his breathing deepen. He became what people expected to see. An old man asleep in his chair. From beneath lowered lids, Leonard observed. Delilah started with the hallway. Shoes off this time. Leonard noticed that too. No announcement. No unnecessary noise. The longer he lay there pretending to sleep, the more he noticed how carefully she moved. Not cautiously. Purposefully. She didn't rush when she thought he was unaware. Didn't cut corners. That bothered him. People almost always did. Leonard felt the old itch, the one that told him to push harder to create conditions where masks slipped. So he changed the conditions. He coughed sharply, shifted in his chair, made it seem like he might wake at any moment. Most people reacted to that with irritation when they thought the person wouldn't remember. He had heard the sighs, the muttered comments, the careless sounds of resentment. Delilah paused. "Mr. Hale?" she said softly again. Leonard stayed still. After a moment, she stepped closer. He felt the air move near his face as she leaned in, checking his breathing. Not touching, just making sure. "Okay," she whispered. She stepped back and continued her work. Leonard felt a faint tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart. He did not like being checked on. He liked it even less that it didn't feel intrusive. By the third day, Leonard realized something uncomfortable. He was no longer testing Delilah out of caution. He was testing her because he wanted her to fail. That realization hit him late one afternoon as he stood in his study, pretending to look for a document he already knew wasn't there. Delilah was cleaning nearby, unaware he was watching her reflection in the glass-fronted cabinet. He searched for signs of impatience. He found none. That evening, Leonard ate dinner alone as usual. The cook had left earlier, the plates neatly arranged in the refrigerator with handwritten labels. Leonard reheated one and sat at the dining table that could easily seat 10. The silence pressed in. He thought about the way Delilah had folded his glasses, about the way she had hesitated before covering his legs with the blanket, as if weighing a choice. Those were not the actions of someone careless. They were the actions of someone attentive. And attention made Leonard uneasy. Attention led to attachment. Attachment led to loss. So he decided to remind himself who was in control. The next morning, Leonard set his plan in motion. He took out his wallet and placed it deliberately on the side table next to his chair. Not tucked away. Not hidden. Open enough that the edge of folded bills could be seen if someone looked closely. He knew the wallet well. The worn leather. The faint crease from decades of use. Inside it, more cash than most people carried in a week, and a black card that had opened doors without question for most of Leonard's adult life. He left it there and sat down. When Delilah arrived, Leonard greeted her with a nod and a few vague words about feeling tired. Then he closed his eyes. This time he felt his pulse quicken, not with fear but with anticipation. This was a test he understood. Money changed people. It always had. From the faint sound of Delilah's footsteps approaching, Leonard could tell she had noticed the wallet. He waited. And in that waiting, something unfamiliar crept in alongside his usual certainty. A small, inconvenient hope. Leonard pushed it away. People were predictable. Soon enough, he told himself, she would prove it. And as the house settled into silence once more, Leonard felt the weight of the wallet beside him, like a challenge laid on the table. Whatever happened next would confirm what he already believed, or force him to confront something he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Leonard had always known the power of stillness. By the fourth day, it had become a game he could not resist. Sitting in his leather chair, the familiar weight of the worn armrests pressing against his elbows, he let the room grow quiet. Sunlight pooled on the polished floorboards, catching dust motes that lazily floated like tiny golden planets. Outside, the city hummed faintly, but inside, the house held its breath. He closed his eyes, tilted his head back, and exhaled slowly. Not because he was tired, he hadn't even opened the book on his lap, but because he wanted to see what she would do next. Delilah entered as usual, quiet but deliberate. Leonard could hear the soft scuff of her shoes against the polished wood, the swish of her uniform brushing her knees. She moved with precision but without stiffness. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. She was not afraid. She was mindful. Leonard felt a small, unaccustomed stir in his chest, part irritation, part curiosity. He had been doing this for decades. Testing. Watching. Waiting for truth to slip out. And yet, here was a person whose truth didn't appear to bend under the weight of observation. She walked to the side table, eyes flicking toward the wallet Leonard had left out the day before. His fingers flexed slightly beneath the book, anticipation tightening his chest. Delilah picked up the wallet. For a fraction of a second, Leonard felt certain he would see carelessness. A slip. A betrayal. But she did nothing of the sort. Instead, she opened a small drawer in the table, carefully placed the wallet inside, and wrote a quick note on a sticky pad before closing it again. Leonard's chest tightened, not with anger but something harder to name. Asterisk moved this for safekeeping. I didn't want it left out. D asterisk. Leonard exhaled slowly. His own heart was louder than the house around him. He had expected to catch her in a moment of weakness, to feel that old satisfaction of being proven right about people. Instead he felt embarrassed and strangely unsettled. He remained still, allowing himself to be the passive observer in his own test. The silence stretched. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust, with a hint of coffee from the kitchen. Leonard had always noticed these things, the smells, the subtle vibrations of life, but rarely allowed himself to pause long enough to care. Delilah returned to her cleaning quietly, never glancing at him, never betraying that she had been watched. She moved like she had her own rhythm, not one dictated by Leonard's presence. He thought of the countless people he had observed in the past, partners, friends, employees, all performing for his approval, all falling short in small ways that confirmed his cynicism. And yet here she was, unmoved by the old tricks that had worked so many times before. Leonard closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him, a mix of awe and irritation settling into the pit of his stomach. He had expected simplicity, but this was something more complicated. Something human. Later, in the quiet of the evening, Leonard found himself reflecting on his own motives. Why was he testing her? Was it caution, as he told himself? Or was it loneliness that made him crave control? Maybe it was both. But the truth was more uncomfortable than he cared to admit. He didn't want her to fail. He poured himself a glass of water, listening to the soft clink of ice against the glass, and sat by the window. Outside, the city continued its relentless march. Inside, he felt the first trace of vulnerability in years. By the time he turned in for the night, Leonard's mind had begun plotting the next layer of his unspoken tests. He didn't realize it yet, but the house had already begun to change him. And as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he could not shake the uneasy thought. What if the person he had been trying to test was actually the one testing him? The house was silent, but the weight of that question lingered like a shadow in the corners, refusing to move. Leonard woke later than usual that morning, though later was relative. He had long ago stopped keeping track of hours in a meaningful way. The house's silence greeted him like an old, expectant friend, and he felt the familiar mixture of comfort and unease. He dressed slowly, carefully, choosing the muted gray sweater that had been his favorite years ago. It smelled faintly of cedar polish and something faintly bitter, his own cologne that had settled into the fabric. He paused in front of the mirror, studying the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. Age had left him smaller than he remembered, though somehow heavier in thought. Delilah arrived on time as always. Leonard barely nodded in greeting, settling into his chair by the window with his cane within reach. He opened a book and pretended to read, but really he was observing. Always observing. The previous day's wallet incident lingered in his mind. He wondered if the calm he had felt afterward had been satisfaction or unease. Delilah started with the kitchen this morning, moving dishes, wiping counters, rearranging items with quiet efficiency. Leonard noted the small habits that set her apart from most people he had employed. She didn't rush, didn't sigh, didn't make a sound when she thought he wasn't watching. Her movements were precise but natural, her eyes constantly scanning without fixating. He let himself drift into a kind of half-sleep, leaning back in the leather chair. This was a test of patience, of integrity, of character. And yet, the more he observed, the more he realized that her character was consistent in ways he could not manipulate. Delilah paused mid-task, glanced at the window, and adjusted the curtains slightly. A sliver of sunlight spilled across his book. Leonard felt a jolt of recognition. She was not acting for him, not performing for his approval. She was acting because it was right. The realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He tried to focus on the book, flipping a page lazily, but his mind kept returning to her quiet diligence. He thought of the years he had spent trying to see people clearly, only to find masks and rehearsed smiles. Delilah's authenticity was unfamiliar territory. Later, he noticed her handling of his personal items. A pen had rolled off the table, and she bent to pick it up, placing it exactly where it belonged without a word. He watched the reflection in the window as she moved, marveling at the simplicity of her care. Leonard wanted to interrupt, to test her again, to provoke some small flaw. But the longer he waited, the more he realized that nothing would break her composure. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't indifference. It was careful attention, like a quiet river that refused to be stirred by wind. By afternoon, Leonard found himself unusually restless. He had spent decades in control, making decisions, weighing risks, observing weakness. And now, for the first time in years, he was the one feeling exposed. He coughed softly, more to break the tension than because he needed to. Delilah looked up, her eyes soft but cautious. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked. "I am," Leonard replied, his voice hoarse but steady. He waited a beat, then added, "Just thinking." Delilah nodded and returned to her work. But Leonard noticed the way she paused for a fraction of a second, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name, pride maybe, but not the kind he had expected. Hours passed. The afternoon light shifted, painting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Leonard's eyes followed Delilah unconsciously as she moved through the rooms, adjusting, cleaning, caring. Every movement seemed deliberate, every choice thoughtful. It struck him then that he had been wrong about the world. About people. About testing, measuring, judging. Delilah had passed every unspoken test, not because she was clever, but because she was consistent. Because she had a moral compass he had long forgotten existed in anyone outside his own reflection. That evening, Leonard sat in his chair longer than usual, letting the room grow quiet. He wondered what other truths might reveal themselves in this new rhythm. Truths about her. Truths about himself. And just as he was settling back, thinking the day had ended quietly as always, he heard the faintest sound of paper moving. Not a note, not a whisper, just the soft shuffle of something shifting. Leonard's pulse quickened. He waited. And then the house seemed to hold its breath with him. Because sometimes he realized watching wasn't just about discovering someone else. Sometimes it was about discovering yourself. Leonard had grown restless that morning, a quiet sort of agitation that made the house feel heavier than usual. He had spent days observing Delilah, noting every careful movement, every subtle display of integrity, yet something in him still demanded more. He moved through the house with deliberate slowness, adjusting a vase here, straightening a picture frame there, though none of it needed attention. The ritual was familiar. He had done similar routines in offices, boardrooms, even his own home for decades. Control. Observation. Assessment. He needed to see, again and again, how people acted when he wasn't truly present. By mid-morning, Delilah arrived with her usual calm efficiency. Leonard barely looked up, placing a small leather wallet on the side table beside his chair. He adjusted his posture, tilted back in the leather, and let his eyes drift closed. Not asleep, not quite, but enough to give the impression that he was unaware. This was deliberate. The wallet was no ordinary test. Leonard knew people. He knew temptation when he saw it. He knew what a few $100s in cash, combined with the black card that had always opened doors, could do to a person under pressure. He listened to the quiet steps approaching, the soft swish of Delilah's uniform brushing against her knees. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish, coffee, and the subtle tang of old wood heated by sunlight. Leonard could hear the careful placement of objects. The gentle tap of a pen returned to its holder, the slight shift of papers on the side table. Then he heard her pause. He opened one eye just enough to see her silhouette in the reflection of the glass-fronted cabinet. Delilah was standing by the wallet, hands hovering just above it. Leonard held his breath. He expected hesitation. He expected curiosity. He expected the human flaw he had been searching for. Instead, she did something he hadn't anticipated. Delilah reached for a small sticky note, wrote a quick line, and gently placed the wallet inside the drawer. She closed it carefully, taped the note on top, and stepped back. Leonard's pulse quickened as he woke, slowly stretching, making a soft groan as if just roused. He picked up the note with a slight frown and read it. Asterisk, moved this for safekeeping. I didn't want it left out. D asterisk. He sat back, feeling a twinge of shame he did not expect. All these years he had tested people, caught them in moments of weakness, and felt the satisfaction of being right. And here, without drama or fanfare, someone had done the right thing simply because it was right. Leonard could not decide if he was impressed or unsettled. Perhaps both. Very conscientious, he muttered aloud, though he doubted she would hear him. He felt a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. Delilah returned to her work, methodical, quiet, unaware of the emotional ripple she had caused. The rest of the day passed with an almost imperceptible shift. Leonard found himself less concerned with control and more with understanding. He noticed the way she adjusted the light, the careful handling of objects, the subtle attentiveness that had eluded him in decades of managing people. It was exhausting in a new way. When evening fell, Leonard sat by the window again, glass of water in hand, and let the city lights bleed into the room. Somewhere down the hall, Delilah moved quietly, the rhythmic sound of her steps punctuating the silence. Leonard felt the weight of observation reverse. He was no longer merely the observer. The house felt alive but differently. That night, Leonard thought of the wallet, the note, the simplicity of her actions. He realized with a shock he tried to suppress, that he wanted more than just correctness. He wanted honesty, consistency, someone to act with integrity without prompt. A strange, uncomfortable thought crept in. What if he had been wrong about people all along? He shook his head and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent again, but the weight of that day pressed in. And somewhere just beyond the kitchen door, a soft creak sounded. Leonard's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. It was just the house settling, he told himself. Or maybe it was not. The silence stretched, leaving a question hanging in the air. Who was being tested, really? Leonard had spent the better part of the morning pretending to doze in his chair. Sunlight spilled through the tall living room windows, cutting diagonal bands of gold across the hardwood floor. The city outside moved at its usual relentless pace, but inside the air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. He knew she would notice it, the wallet. He had placed it deliberately on the side table, its worn leather glinting faintly in the morning light. Cash peeked from the edges, the black card nestled inside like a silent test. Leonard's eyes remained closed, his breathing slow, careful, measured. Not quite asleep, not fully awake, just enough to give the impression of vulnerability. Delilah moved quietly around the room. Leonard could hear her footsteps on the floorboards, faint but purposeful. She had developed a rhythm over the past week, one that was almost hypnotic. Every movement was deliberate, no wasted motion, no unnecessary noise. Then he heard it, the faint rustle of her fingers brushing the wallet. He tensed. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment that would confirm either his suspicions or his disappointment. Leonard waited, holding his breath as he listened. She did not take the money. She did not touch the black card. Instead, she opened the small drawer of the side table, gently placing the wallet inside. She took a sticky note from her apron pocket, scribbled a few words and secured it on top. Leonard's eyes snapped open, and he picked up the note with a shaking hand. Read. Asterisk, moved this for safekeeping. I didn't want it left out. The asterisk. He stared at it for a long moment. A slow, uneasy sensation began to creep up his spine. All these years, Leonard had taken satisfaction in catching people in moments of weakness, in proving them wrong, in confirming his own cynicism about human nature. But here was someone who had done the right thing without being told, without reward, without fanfare. For a brief moment, Leonard felt a strange mix of emotions: surprise, admiration, and something he tried to suppress: shame. Delilah returned to her work without looking up. She moved around the room, dusting, straightening, wiping surfaces with the same careful attention she had shown since her first day. She had no idea the effect her actions had on Leonard. He studied her from his chair. Her dark skin glowed softly in the sunlight, her hair pulled back neatly, the simple uniform she wore accentuating her purposeful movements. There was no pretense, no performance, only quiet, consistent integrity. Leonard leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of his own life pressing down. For decades, he had manipulated, observed, and tested people to see their true selves. And for the first time, someone had passed his unspoken tests without effort, without challenge, without even realizing they were being evaluated. He felt a stirring in his chest, a feeling he had not recognized in years. It was not pride. It was not satisfaction. It was humility. Leonard shifted slightly in his chair, realizing that he had been the one under scrutiny all along. The house, the silence, Delilah's quiet diligence, it had all been holding up a mirror, and the reflection staring back at him was one he barely recognized. He cleared his throat, a small sound that made Delilah glance up briefly. "Very conscientious," he said softly. "Thank you." She nodded once, returning to her tasks. No comment. No acknowledgement beyond the small, respectful gesture. The day stretched on, each hour heavier than the last. Leonard found himself unable to focus on his usual routines, his mind replaying the simple actions of the maid. How she had noticed the wallet, how she had moved it, how she had left the note. How she had acted not out of fear or expectation, but out of quiet decency. That evening, Leonard sat by the window watching the city lights flicker on as dusk fell. Somewhere behind him, Delilah moved quietly through the house, the soft sound of her steps punctuating the silence. Leonard felt a small, unfamiliar tension, an unease that came not from fear but from recognition. Recognition that sometimes, the person you think you're testing isn't the one under examination. He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of the day settle around him. Somewhere, deep in the quiet house, a question lingered like a shadow. Had he been the one who failed to understand all along? Leonard woke to the faint hum of the city outside his window, though he didn't move immediately. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar ache in his knees and the unfamiliar weight in his chest. The past few days had been unsettling. Delilah's quiet competence had chipped away at something he didn't want to admit was fragile: his own certainty about people. He dressed slowly, careful not to rush. Even in this age had taught him discipline. He moved through the house with deliberate attention, checking the usual spots: the cane by the door, the glass of water by the chair, the small stack of books on the side table. Everything in place, yet something felt off. Delilah arrived as she always did, without fanfare. Leonard barely acknowledged her presence, settling into his chair by the window, pretending to read. But today pretending wasn't enough. His mind kept drifting to the wallet, the note, the quiet dignity of her actions. He had spent decades catching people in weakness, but she had passed without effort. As she moved through the house, adjusting the curtains, dusting the shelves, Leonard's eyes followed every motion. He noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she exhaled softly when she thought no one was watching. She was human, yes, but human with a strength he had rarely encountered. He decided to push the test further. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he needed to see what lay beneath that calm exterior. He left his wallet on the side table again, cash and card plainly visible, and added a small envelope marked, "Important, do not touch." Leonard leaned back, closed his eyes, and waited. The house was silent except for the soft swish of Delilah's steps. She approached the table, paused, and Leonard could hear her breathing shift slightly as she considered the envelope. Fingers hovered, then retreated. She opened the drawer where the wallet had been previously stored, placed the envelope inside without a word, and left another note atop it. Asterisk handled. Didn't want to risk it being unattended. The asterisk. Leonard opened his eyes slowly, feeling the tug of something unfamiliar. Frustration? No. Respect? Partly. But also a shame. All these years, he had believed that integrity was rare, that people were easily swayed by temptation or convenience. And here she was, proving him wrong without effort, without argument, without ego. He tried to focus on the book in his lap, but the words blurred. He felt the quiet shift in the house, the subtle weight of observation turning back on him. The thought made him uneasy. Perhaps the test had always been about himself, not her. Later that afternoon, Leonard found himself standing in the hallway, hands gripping the railing, watching Delilah from a distance. She moved with careful precision, humming softly once, then stopping abruptly, realizing she had been overheard. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug and continued her work. Leonard felt the sting of realization. He had been testing, judging, observing, but she had acted not for reward, not for approval, but because it was simply right. That evening he sat by the window again, city lights flickering like distant stars. He felt the quiet stir of guilt and admiration, tangled together in a way he hadn't expected. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a question refused to leave. Had he spent decades measuring others only to be measured himself? The house was silent, but the tension lingered. Leonard's pulse quickened slightly, and he realized with a start that tomorrow would require him to confront more than just Delilah's integrity. It would require him to confront his own. Leonard woke to the faint sound of a phone ringing somewhere in the house. It was soft at first, a distant trill that might have been imagined, but then it became clear, a real call. He had thought he'd trained himself to ignore such distractions, but curiosity pricked at him like a persistent fly. From his chair by the window, he could hear Delilah's voice, low and careful, carrying a gentle rhythm. He leaned back, listening, pretending to be absorbed in the morning sunlight spilling across the floorboards. "Yes, I got the message," she said softly. "I know. I'll make sure he's okay." "Yes, I understand." The voice on the other end was muffled, hurried. Leonard's ears caught fragments: bills, doctors, school. Something about responsibility pressing down heavily, making even ordinary tasks seem monumental. Delilah's voice, calm and controlled, bore the weight without breaking. He had expected care and attentiveness from a maid. He had not expected this. She paused, inhaled, then continued. "I'll handle it, Mom. I promise. I just need a little more time." Leonard sat up straighter, a cold awareness settling in his chest. He realized that he had been observing her carefully, yes, but he had never considered the world she carried outside his house. There was a life beyond his tests, a network of obligations and pressures that had nothing to do with him, and yet she managed it all with grace. He heard her hang up and place the phone down gently, as though it were a delicate object. She took a breath, rubbed her forehead briefly, and then returned to her duties, folding laundry with the same measured care she applied to everything else. Leonard's chest tightened. He felt the rare, uncomfortable ache of empathy, a sensation he had long thought reserved for memory and regrets. He had spent decades in control, calculating, observing, weighing the motives of everyone who crossed his path. And here, in his house, someone had revealed herself without being prompted, without pretense. He realized suddenly that she had noticed him listening. He hadn't intended to, of course, but the truth always had a way of asserting itself. She glanced toward him briefly, her expression neutral but knowing, then returned to her work as if nothing had happened. Leonard shifted in his chair, adjusting the book in his lap though he wasn't reading it. He thought about the envelope and the wallet, about the note she had left, about the way she had managed to uphold her integrity without fanfare. And now he had glimpsed a new layer, someone balancing duties far beyond what he had imagined. It made him uneasy. He leaned back, letting the sunlight fall across his face, and felt the weight of isolation press harder. He had built walls over decades, walls around wealth, around emotion, around trust. And now he was confronted not by force or argument, but by quiet strength and care that demanded nothing in return. He wanted to speak, to acknowledge her burden, to offer something he couldn't even name. But he stayed silent. Silence, he realized, was the only way to truly observe, to truly understand. The day moved slowly. Leonard watched, heart thumping, as Delilah moved from room to room. The house no longer felt simply quiet. It felt alive, charged with unspoken truths. By evening, he sat by the window, hands folded over the armrest, thinking about the phone call he had overheard. The weight of responsibility, the patience, the resilience, it all collided with his long-held beliefs about people, about weakness, about character. Leonard realized something that made him swallow hard. He had been measuring people for a lifetime, dissecting their motives, testing them, judging them. And in doing so, he had failed to see one simple truth. Sometimes, the quietest actions reveal the most about a person. And somewhere deep in the house, a lesson was taking hold, one that would challenge everything Leonard thought he knew about trust, care, and the value of observing from a distance. As he sat there, staring at the shadows lengthening across the floor, Leonard knew that the next day would bring another test, not of Delilah but of himself, because he was no longer sure who was learning from whom. The house felt different that morning. Leonard noticed it the moment he opened his eyes. The sunlight cut across the living room in sharper lines, highlighting dust motes that floated like tiny specters in the air. The quiet was deeper, but it was not empty. Something had shifted. Delilah arrived on time, her movements calm and deliberate as always. Leonard, as was now his habit, settled into his chair by the window, pretending to read a book, though his attention was nowhere near the page. His eyes kept flicking to the side table, to the wallet tucked safely in its drawer, to the small sticky note she had left. Integrity in action. He let himself drift, pretending to doze, waiting for the subtle cues that he had come to notice so carefully. The house was filled with the faint scent of lemon polish and the soft aroma of her shampoo, a humanizing touch he had never realized he craved. Then came a sound that made his pulse tighten. A soft shuffle of papers. Leonard lifted one eyelid just enough to see Delilah bending over a small pile of envelopes she had found in the study. She handled them gently, sorting them into neat stacks, opening one briefly to glance at the contents, then closing it and setting it aside. There was no curiosity beyond what was necessary, no hint of judgment, just careful attention. Leonard felt an unfamiliar twinge in his chest. Over decades, he had watched people handle wealth, secrets, and responsibility with varying degrees of greed, fear, or ambition. And here, in the quiet of his house, someone was managing both his possessions and his life with nothing but thoughtfulness. He shifted in his chair, making a faint creak. Delilah paused, hands resting lightly on a stack of letters, listening. But she did not look at him. She did not break her rhythm. Leonard realized, uncomfortably, that he had begun to admire her discipline, and that admiration made him vulnerable in ways he had not experienced in decades. Later, during lunch, Leonard observed her in the kitchen. She moved with quiet efficiency, preparing his meal with care but without ceremony. The soup was warm, the bread neatly sliced, the table set in a way that seemed casual yet precise. "You take care in everything you do," Leonard said softly, more to himself than to her. She looked up briefly, her eyes calm but aware. "I try," she said simply, returning to the task at hand. Leonard leaned back in his chair, feeling the odd tension of wanting to test her further but also wanting to stop. He realized he no longer cared if she failed. In fact, the thought of failure now seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the quiet steadiness of her actions, the integrity she carried effortlessly. By mid-afternoon, Leonard decided to push the boundaries, not out of suspicion but out of necessity. He left a folded stack of cash in an open drawer, alongside a note that read, *, handled carefully. This is important. *. He returned to his chair, eyes closed, listening for the inevitable slip. But there was none. Delilah approached, paused, and then, with the same calm precision she had shown all week, placed the money into another drawer, secured the note on top, and moved away without a word. Leonard opened his eyes, heart thudding. He had spent a lifetime expecting weakness, flaws, or hidden motives, and here was nothing but honesty and careful judgment. He felt a strange mixture of relief, admiration, and a gnawing unease that he could not place. That evening, Leonard sat by the window, glass of water in hand, staring at the city lights that flickered below. Delilah's presence was almost ghostly as she moved through the house quietly, a testament to order and care. Leonard realized something startling. The tests he had imposed, the observations he had orchestrated, were no longer about discovering who Delilah was. They were about discovering who he had become, and what he had lost along the way. A small, hesitant thought crept into his mind. Could he trust someone so effortlessly? Could he accept care without suspicion? The house remained silent, but for the first time, Leonard felt it was holding him accountable. And as he leaned back, staring at the ceiling, he wondered whether the next day would reveal not a mistake on her part, but a truth about himself he was not prepared to face. Leonard did not pretend to sleep that day. He lay awake in his bedroom, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling that ran like a scar above the light fixture. His hands rested on his chest, fingers loosely folded, his breathing slow but intentional. For the first time since Delilah had entered his life, he wanted to be fully present. No tests, no tricks, just awareness. The house hummed with its usual quiet sounds. Pipes ticking. The distant groan of an elevator somewhere below. Footsteps moving steadily through the hallway. Delilah's footsteps. She paused outside his bedroom door longer than usual. Leonard felt it before he heard it, the hesitation, the careful calculation. A soft knock followed. "Mr. Hale?" she said gently. "Are you awake?" Leonard hesitated. For years, he had hidden behind silence, behind the safety of being unreadable. Answering her felt like stepping onto unstable ground. "Yes," he said finally. His voice sounded thinner than he expected. She opened the door slowly, as if giving him time to object. "I didn't want to disturb you," she said. "But your doctor's office called earlier. They said you missed a follow-up appointment last week." Leonard frowned. He had missed it on purpose. Doctors always wanted something from him. More tests, more restrictions, more reminders that time was winning. "I'm fine," he said curtly. Delilah did not argue. She simply nodded and placed the note on the dresser. "I figured you might say that," she said. "So I wrote down the number anyway. Just in case." She turned to leave, but Leonard spoke before he could stop himself. "Why do you care?" The question hung in the air, heavier than he intended. Delilah stopped, her back still turned to him. "I'm paid to," she said after a moment. Leonard almost let it go. Almost. But something in her voice, too controlled, too careful, made him push. "That's not the whole truth." She turned slowly. Her expression was composed, but her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "No," she said quietly. "It's not." She walked back toward the bed, stopping a respectful distance away. "I care because ignoring things doesn't make them go away," she said. "And because I've watched people I love pretend they're fine until it was too late." Leonard's throat tightened. "You're speaking from experience." "Yes." Silence settled between them. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Leonard shifted, propping himself up on one elbow. "That phone call I overheard," he said. "The other day." Delilah's shoulders stiffened. I wasn't trying to listen, he added quickly. But I heard enough to know you're carrying more than this job. She looked down at her hands. For the first time since he had known her, her composure cracked, just slightly. My father's sick, she said. Has been for a while. Medical bills pile up fast. My younger brother's in community college. I help where I can. Leonard nodded slowly. And yet you show up here every day, he said. On time. Focused. Careful. I don't have a choice, she said. You always have a choice, Leonard replied. She met his gaze, then really met it. Not when people depend on you. The words hit Leonard harder than he expected. He thought of the empire he had built, the employees who had depended on him, the family he had lost touch with in the process. He had chosen ambition. Delilah had chosen responsibility. I've been testing you, Leonard said suddenly. Delilah did not react right away. She waited, her face neutral as if bracing herself. I know, she said. Leonard blinked. You knew? She nodded. From the first week. People don't accidentally leave cash lying around. Or pretend to sleep at just the wrong moments. A strange mix of embarrassment and admiration washed over him. Why didn't you say anything? Because it wasn't my place, she said. And because I understood why you were doing it. And why was that? She hesitated, then spoke softly. You're afraid of being taken advantage of. And you're lonely. Leonard felt as though the room had tilted. No one had spoken to him with such directness in years. He let out a slow breath. You're right, he said. The admission felt like surrender. And relief. Delilah stepped back, giving him space. I should finish up for the day, she said. As she reached the door, Leonard spoke again. Tomorrow, he said, I'd like you to help me with something personal. She paused. What kind of something? He looked at her, eyes steady but uncertain. Something I've avoided for a long time. Delilah nodded once. All right, she said. She left the room, the door closing softly behind her. Leonard lay back against the pillows, heart pounding. He had crossed an invisible line, revealed too much, perhaps. Or maybe, for the first time, just enough. What he planned to ask her tomorrow could change everything. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for the answer it might bring. Leonard slept poorly that night. Not because of pain or discomfort, but because his mind refused to settle. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of the conversation replayed themselves. Delilah's calm voice. Her quiet certainty. The way she had named his loneliness without cruelty. By morning, he had made a decision that felt both reckless and overdue. When Delilah arrived, he was already dressed, sitting upright at the kitchen table instead of his usual chair by the window. She noticed immediately. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, a flicker of surprise she didn't bother hiding. You're up early, she said. So are you, Leonard replied. She gave a small smile and set her bag down. What did you want help with? Leonard didn't answer right away. He pushed a folder across the table toward her. It was thick, worn at the edges, the kind of folder that had been opened and closed many times over the years and then forgotten. What's this? She asked. My will, he said. The word landed heavily between them. Delilah did not reach for the folder. She sat down instead, hands folded in her lap. That's something lawyers usually handle, she said carefully. I know, Leonard replied. They already have. This isn't about legality. It's about clarity. He watched her closely as he spoke. No greed flickered across her face. No curiosity sharpened her gaze. Only caution. I want you to read it, he continued. Not for advice. Just tell me what you see. Delilah hesitated. I don't think that's appropriate. Leonard nodded. That's exactly why I'm asking you. Silence stretched. Finally, she reached forward and opened the folder, scanning the first few pages. Her brow furrowed almost immediately. You've left most of your estate to foundations, she said slowly. Medical research, business scholarships, public initiatives. Yes. And very little to family, she added. Leonard swallowed. I don't have much family left. Delilah flipped another page, then another. Her movements slowed. You don't mention anyone by name, she said. Not really. It's all institutions. Structures. Leonard leaned back in his chair. I built my life on structures, he said. They felt safer than people. She closed the folder gently. This doesn't feel finished. No, Leonard said. It feels like something written by a man who didn't want to look too closely at his own life. Delilah studied him for a long moment. Why show this to me? Leonard met her gaze. Because you don't want anything from me. That's not entirely true, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I want you to take care of yourself, she said simply. The words struck him harder than any accusation could have. Leonard looked down at the table. There's more, he said. Something I haven't told you. Delilah straightened, sensing the shift. I have a son, Leonard said. Her eyes widened slightly. You never mentioned. We haven't spoken in years, Leonard interrupted. He was young when I sent him away to boarding school. I told myself it was for his future. The truth is, I didn't know how to be present. Delilah remained silent, letting him speak. He grew up, Leonard continued. I grew richer. And somewhere along the way, we became strangers who shared a last name. He pushed another document across the table. An old envelope yellowed with time. That's the last letter he sent me, Leonard said. I never opened it. Delilah stared at the envelope, then back at him. Why now? Because I'm running out of time, Leonard said quietly. And because you made me realize that avoiding pain doesn't erase it. It just passes it on. Delilah reached for the envelope but stopped herself. What do you want me to do? Leonard's voice wavered for the first time. I want you to be there when I read it. Her expression softened. Are you sure? No, he said honestly. But I think I need to be. She nodded once. Then we'll do it together. When you're ready. Leonard closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. The house felt unbearably quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was waiting. As Delilah stood to make coffee, Leonard stared at the unopened envelope. Whatever was inside had the power to undo years of silence. And he was no longer sure whether that terrified him or gave him hope. Leonard spent the morning in restless anticipation. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, its edges worn, the paper brittle with age. He kept glancing at it as if staring could somehow prepare him for what lay inside. Delilah moved around the kitchen quietly, brewing coffee, washing dishes, and humming softly to herself. Her calm efficiency contrasted sharply with the storm of thoughts swirling in Leonard's mind. He had faced boardrooms, hostile negotiations, and life-or-death business decisions, but nothing had ever felt as precarious as the next few minutes. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, I think I'm ready. Delilah nodded, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. She sat across from him, hands folded, eyes steady and patient. Then let's do this, she said simply. Leonard picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of years in his fingers. The seal was fragile, cracking slightly as he broke it. He unfolded the letter inside, the handwriting familiar yet distant. Dear Father, it began. The words struck him with an odd mix of familiarity and pain. The letter was not accusatory. It did not demand answers. It simply existed as a bridge to the past, a record of love, confusion, and longing from a child who had grown up believing his father had chosen ambition over presence. Leonard read aloud, his voice quivering at times. The milestones he had missed, the disappointments that had piled up silently, the small triumphs of a young man learning to navigate the world without a father's guidance. Delilah listened quietly, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Leonard, noting the subtle changes in his expression. The tightening of his jaw, the trembling of his hands, the way his eyes flickered over certain phrases. When he finished, the kitchen was silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. Leonard lowered the letter onto the table, staring at it as if expecting it to offer answers that it could not. I didn't realize, he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper, how much he needed me. Delilah reached across the table, placing a hand lightly over his. He's still there, she said softly. And you still can be there. It's not too late. Leonard swallowed hard. Her words felt both comforting and frightening. There were decades to make up for, memories that could never be rewritten, apologies that would never be fully received. I don't even know where to start, Leonard admitted. You start by showing up, Delilah said. That's all it takes at first. He looked at her, feeling the gravity of what she had just said. It wasn't just a practical suggestion, it was a challenge. A test of a different kind that required courage and humility in equal measure. Leonard exhaled slowly, nodding. Then I'll start. Tomorrow. Delilah gave him a small, approving smile. Good. That's all you need to do. For the first time in years, Leonard felt the stirrings of hope. Not the blind hope of a businessman counting on fortune or influence, but a quiet, careful hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the bridges burned by time could be rebuilt. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this was only the beginning, because the letter had opened a door that he could no longer ignore, and he had someone he trusted to guide him through it. The envelope sat on the table, a silent reminder of the past, and Leonard realized the next step would demand everything he had learned and everything he had avoided: courage, honesty, and the willingness to be vulnerable. And he was ready to face it. Leonard stood by the front window long before the car arrived. He told himself he was only watching the street out of habit, but his reflection in the glass betrayed him. His shoulders were stiff. His jaw set too tight. This was not the posture of a man waiting for a delivery or a visitor. This was the posture of someone bracing for impact. Delilah noticed, of course. She always did. You don't have to do this today, she said gently from the kitchen doorway. Leonard didn't turn. If I don't do it today, I won't do it at all. She nodded, accepting that answer without trying to soften it. Then I'll be here, she said. However it goes. He appreciated that she didn't say everything will be fine. She understood better than most that some things were not meant to be easy. The car pulled up 20 minutes later. A modest sedan. No hesitation in the parking, no dramatic pause. Just a clean stop by the curb, like the driver had done this before in other parts of his life, arriving places where he wasn't sure he belonged. Leonard's heart began to pound. The man who stepped out was taller than Leonard remembered, broader in the shoulders, older in the face but not hardened. There was caution in the way he looked at the building, at the windows, as if measuring distance rather than opportunity. Leonard swallowed. That's him. Delilah stayed quiet. The doorbell rang. Leonard waited a beat too long before answering. His hand hovered over the handle, fingers trembling slightly. Then he opened the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The man in front of him looked like a stranger and a mirror at the same time. Leonard recognized the eyes immediately. The same deep-set gaze. The same crease between the brows when thinking too hard. Hello, the man said finally. His voice was steady but guarded. Leonard cleared his throat. Thank you for coming. There was a pause. Then a nod. You said it was important. Leonard stepped aside. Please. Come in. The man hesitated, then crossed the threshold. His eyes flicked briefly to Delilah, standing a respectful distance away. She offered a polite nod, nothing more. I'll make some coffee, she said, and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving father and son alone in the living room. Leonard gestured toward the couch. You can sit. I'm fine, the man replied, remaining standing. Leonard felt the distance between them like a physical thing. He took a breath. I won't keep you long. That would be appreciated, the man said. Not cruel. Just honest. Leonard nodded. I received your letter. Years ago. The man's jaw tightened. And you decided to answer now? I didn't open it until recently, Leonard admitted. Silence fell heavy and sharp. You didn't open it, the man repeated slowly. So all those years. I know, Leonard interrupted quietly. There's no excuse. Only the truth. And that is. Leonard folded his hands together, grounding himself. I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd already missed. Afraid of realizing I'd failed you. The man let out a short, humorless laugh. You didn't need to read a letter to know that. Leonard felt the words land not as an attack but as a fact. You're right, he said. The man studied him closely now, as if searching for something familiar beneath the age and regret. Why now? He asked. Leonard hesitated. He could give a dozen answers. Illness, age, mortality. But none felt honest enough. Because someone reminded me what responsibility looks like, he said finally. The man glanced toward the kitchen. Your staff. Leonard nodded. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't judge. She just showed up. Every day. The man absorbed this, saying nothing. I don't expect forgiveness, Leonard continued. I'm not asking to fix the past. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. Another silence. This one different. Less sharp. The man finally sat down. I didn't come for an apology, he said. I came because I needed to see if you were still hiding. Leonard met his gaze. Am I? The man considered that. Not like before. Delilah returned quietly, setting coffee cups on the table without interrupting. Leonard noticed how his son watched her movements, careful, observant. She seems solid, the man said. Leonard nodded. She is. The man stood again, picking up his jacket. I don't know what this becomes, he said. But this conversation mattered. Leonard felt a tightness in his chest. It did, he agreed. At the door the man paused. If you want to talk again, he said, don't wait another decade. Leonard nodded. I won't. The door closed softly. Leonard stood there, breathing slowly, heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with the fragile awareness that something long broken had not healed, but had finally stopped bleeding. Behind him, Delilah said nothing. She didn't need to. Leonard did not move from the doorway for a long time after it closed. The silence that followed his son's departure was not empty. It pressed in on him, heavy with what had been said and what had been left hanging in the air. He felt older than he had that morning, but also strangely lighter, as if something lodged deep in his chest had finally shifted. Delilah waited. She did not rush to fill the quiet or ask how he felt. She moved through the living room with her usual steadiness, gathering the untouched coffee cups, straightening a cushion that didn't need straightening. Her restraint was its own kind of care. I didn't expect him to stay, Leonard said at last. Delilah paused, then nodded. You gave him honesty, she said. That's more than he probably expected. Leonard sank slowly into his chair. His hands trembled as he rested them on the armrests. I wanted more time, he admitted. But I suppose wanting doesn't change what people are ready to give. No, Delilah agreed. It doesn't. She sat across from him, not too close, not too far. But he came, she added. That matters. Leonard closed his eyes briefly. Images flickered through his mind. His son as a boy, awkward and quiet, standing stiffly at the gates of a boarding school. His own back turned as meetings and deadlines swallowed whole years. Regret rose sharply, then settled into something steadier. Not despair. Awareness. I spent my life thinking control was the same as responsibility, Leonard said. If I managed everything, owned everything, predicted everything, then nothing could hurt me. Delilah listened without interrupting. But I was wrong, he continued. Control just kept me insulated. Responsibility requires showing up. She nodded slowly. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then, Leonard said. He looked at her more closely now. There were faint lines of tiredness around her eyes, barely visible but unmistakable. He remembered the phone call. The quiet pressure she carried without complaint. "You did that for your family," he said. Delilah's shoulders stiffened slightly. "I try to." Leonard leaned forward. "You shouldn't have to do it alone." She met his gaze, cautious. "I'm not asking for help." "I know," Leonard said. "That's what worries me." The words surprised both of them. Delilah looked away, her jaw tightening. "I've seen what happens when people wait too long to accept help," Leonard continued. "They convince themselves they're strong enough. Until one day they aren't." Delilah took a slow breath. "And I've seen what happens when help comes with strings," she replied quietly. Leonard absorbed that. He nodded once. "Fair." They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. Balanced. Later that afternoon, Leonard asked Delilah to help him organize old boxes in the study. They were filled with documents, photographs, forgotten fragments of a life lived at full speed. As she handed him a faded photograph, he froze. It showed a much younger Leonard standing beside a woman, both of them smiling stiffly, unaware of the years that would pull them apart. His son stood between them, small hand gripping his mother's coat. "I don't remember this picture," Leonard said. Delilah studied it. "But you remember the moment." "Yes," Leonard said. "I remember thinking I'd have time later." He placed the photograph carefully back in the box as if it might bruise. As the sun dipped lower, Leonard felt a heaviness settle over him, fatigue that went beyond the physical. He lowered himself into his chair, breath shallow. Delilah noticed immediately. "You don't look well," she said. "I'm fine," Leonard replied automatically. Then he stopped. He shook his head. "No, I'm not." Delilah crossed the room. "Do you want me to call your doctor?" Leonard hesitated. Pride rose instinctively, then fell away. "Yes," he said. "Please." As she reached for her phone, Leonard felt a sharp, sudden pressure in his chest. Not pain exactly. Something tighter. More urgent. His vision blurred slightly. Delilah looked up, alarm flickering across her calm expression. "Leonard?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the words came out slow, heavy. "I think something's wrong," he said. The phone slipped slightly in Delilah's hand as she moved closer, her voice steady but urgent now. "Stay with me," she said. "Just stay with me." Leonard tried to focus on her face, on the certainty in her eyes. But as the room tilted and the edges of his vision darkened, he realized this was not another test. This was real. Leonard awoke to the beeping of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic. For a moment, panic fluttered in his chest. Then he remembered. The chest pain. Delilah. He tried to sit up, but a sharp ache stopped him. His hospital gown felt stiff and cold against his skin. A nurse, hearing the slight movement, appeared almost instantly. "You're awake," she said, smiling gently. "You had a minor heart attack, but you're stable now. Rest is important." Leonard nodded slowly, swallowing hard. His throat was dry, but words failed him. For the first time in decades, he felt fragile. The door opened quietly and Delilah stepped in. Her expression was composed, but her eyes betrayed the tension she had been holding back. She carried a cup of water, which she offered without a word. "You scared me," Leonard said hoarsely, voice barely above a whisper. "I know," she replied softly. "But you're still here." He took the water, letting it slide down slowly. He noticed the faint crease in her forehead, the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself as if bracing for impact. But she never faltered. "You stayed with me?" he asked finally. Delilah shook her head slightly. "I was outside making sure the paramedics had your son on the line. You weren't alone." Leonard's mind jolted. His son. He had barely had time to process the earlier visit, and now she had coordinated something else entirely. "You did all this?" he asked. Delilah smiled faintly. "It's called responsibility," she said. "Something you've been learning about, too." He swallowed again, feeling an unfamiliar vulnerability rising inside him. Thank you, he whispered. Delilah didn't answer immediately. She simply pulled a chair close and sat. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the machines, a gentle cadence that seemed almost like a heartbeat echoing in the silence. "You've been testing me," Leonard said after a pause. "All this time." Delilah's eyes met his. "I suppose," she said, "but not in the way you think. I was testing myself too, seeing if I could stay steady, if I could act rightly without being asked, without reward. And now, I think you've learned something as well." Leonard exhaled slowly. "I have," he admitted. "I've learned that watching people isn't enough. Caring is something you have to let in, even when it makes you uncomfortable." There was a long pause. Then Leonard spoke again, quieter this time. "I need to make things right with my son." Delilah nodded. "He's waiting." Leonard hesitated, looking at the ceiling. He felt the weight of years pressing down on him. But he also felt a spark of something fragile yet undeniable: hope. "Will you help me?" he asked. Delilah's smile softened, warmer now. "I will," she said. The rest of the day passed slowly. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting monitors. Leonard let himself rest, occasionally glancing out the window at the late afternoon sun spilling into the room. Delilah never left his side, quietly handling paperwork, messages, and phone calls. When evening fell, Leonard realized something he hadn't felt in decades. He was not alone. He had someone he trusted beside him. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that he might be able to rebuild the bridges he had burned. As the lights of the city began to flicker on outside the hospital window, Leonard looked at Delilah. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start." She nodded. "Tomorrow we start." And for the first time, Leonard felt that the path ahead, uncertain, daunting, and painful, was one he could face with someone by his side. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, cutting soft stripes across Leonard's bed. He had slept better than expected, though the lingering aches reminded him that he was far from fully recovered. Delilah was already there when he woke, notebook and pen in hand, ready to organize the day. "Good morning," she said quietly, a faint smile lifting the corners of her mouth. Leonard managed a small nod. "Good morning," he replied, voice raspy. He felt the weight of yesterday still pressing on him, and yet, beneath it, a strange anticipation stirred. Delilah set the notebook down and pulled up a chair beside him. "Your son called last night," she said. "He wanted to check in before coming over." Leonard's chest tightened. "Did he sound?" "Cautious," Delilah said, choosing her words carefully. "But willing." He took a slow breath, letting it fill him with both nerves and resolve. "I suppose willingness is the only thing I can ask for," he said quietly. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the distant footsteps in the corridor. Leonard felt exposed, stripped of all his usual defenses. In a way, it was liberating. Delilah handed him the phone when it rang, his son's name flashing on the screen. Leonard's hand trembled slightly as he answered. "Hello," he said, voice low. "Dad." The voice was younger than he remembered, though older than he expected. Cautious, polite, yet tinged with a vulnerability that Leonard's heart recognized immediately. "Yes, it's me," Leonard replied. There was a pause. Then, I'm on my way." They hung up before Leonard could respond further. He looked at Delilah. "I think I'm ready." She nodded. "You've already done the hardest part, showing you cared enough to try." An hour later, Leonard's son arrived. The door opened quietly and Leonard rose slowly from the bed. His son paused in the doorway, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and guarded emotion. "Hi," Leonard said softly. "Hi," his son replied, voice tight. He stepped closer, then hesitated, unsure whether to embrace the man who had been absent for so long. Leonard held out his hand first. "I'm glad you came." For a long moment, the son studied the hand, then slowly took it. It was a small gesture, but it carried years of unspoken words. They moved to sit together, a fragile distance between them, and Leonard gestured toward the envelope on the nightstand. "I read your letter," he said. I want to understand. I want to hear from you." His son nodded, swallowing. "I wasn't sure if you would ever open it." "I wasn't sure if I could," Leonard admitted. "But I did. And I want to do better." They talked. Slowly at first, cautiously measuring each word. Memories surfaced, childhood birthdays missed, school events forgotten, milestones uncelebrated. Leonard listened, truly listened for the first time in decades. "I don't expect everything to be fixed," his son said. "But I want honesty and presence. That's all I ask." Leonard nodded, throat tight. "Then that's what I'll give you. Starting now." Hours passed in quiet conversation. Stories were shared, laughter slipped in between tears, and the air in the hospital room felt lighter. Leonard realized that forgiveness was not a single moment, it was a process, and willingness to engage was the first step. Delilah moved quietly around the room, offering water and snacks, keeping the space calm but unobtrusive. Her presence was a steady anchor, reminding Leonard that he didn't have to navigate this alone. As the afternoon sunlight softened, Leonard's son stood to leave. "Thank you," he said, voice quieter now, more measured. I appreciate the effort." Leonard nodded. "We'll keep talking," he said. "Whenever you're ready." After the door closed, Leonard sank back into his chair. The room felt emptier, yet not lonely. The first step had been taken, fragile but real. Delilah sat across from him, a small smile on her face. "You did well," she said softly. Leonard looked at her, chest still tight but lighter. "We did well," he corrected. "And there's more to do." She nodded. "There always is." Leonard leaned back, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of hope settle deep inside him. It was not easy. It would not be fast. But for the first time in decades, he believed that he could rebuild what he had lost. And he knew he wouldn't have to do it alone. The following morning, Leonard woke with a strange mixture of fatigue and resolve. The hospital room was quiet, the sunlight spilling across the floor like molten gold. Delilah was already at his side, reviewing the schedule for his follow-up care, but Leonard barely noticed the clipboard in her hands. His mind was occupied with the visit from his son, the conversation they'd shared, and the fragile threads of trust that had been tentatively rewoven. He pushed himself upright slowly, wincing as a faint twinge ran across his chest. Delilah noticed immediately. "You're pushing too hard," she said softly, moving closer. "I have to keep moving," Leonard replied, brushing off the concern, though the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "I can't waste this second chance." Delilah gave him a long, measured look. "This second chance isn't just about rebuilding relationships," she said. "It's also about preserving your life to do it." He exhaled slowly, nodding. "I know. I've never had the patience to take things slowly." Her gaze softened. "Maybe now's the time to learn." They spent the morning going through paperwork, organizing medical documents, and making appointments. Leonard found a quiet satisfaction in the process, a feeling he hadn't expected. The simple act of preparing, planning, and sharing the responsibility with someone he trusted. By afternoon, the conversation drifted. Delilah was folding some hospital laundry, a small routine she insisted on even here, and Leonard watched her with a mixture of admiration and unease. He realized he had been observing her from a distance for so long that seeing her in everyday life, so human and grounded, felt like discovering a new dimension of reality. "Leonard," she said suddenly, folding a towel with precise care. "You've been holding on to too much by yourself. That includes your wealth, your guilt, your regrets. You need to let someone in, even if just a little at a time." He looked at her, swallowing hard. "And if I fail?" Delilah didn't hesitate. "Then you fail honestly. That's still better than pretending it never mattered." Leonard absorbed the words. He felt the weight of decades pressing down, the mistakes he could never erase. Yet beneath that weight he sensed a subtle shift, a quiet understanding that integrity and honesty could coexist with vulnerability. As the afternoon sun softened into gold, Leonard found himself staring at the envelope again, the one his son had sent so many years ago. It no longer represented fear or regret. Now it was a symbol of opportunity. Delilah noticed. "You're thinking about him again?" she said gently. "Yes," Leonard admitted. "I keep wondering, what if I hadn't waited so long?" She placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Then you'd have learned a different lesson. But now you have a chance to do it right." Her reassurance, simple yet profound, made Leonard's chest tighten, not with guilt but with recognition. Recognition that he didn't have to face the consequences of his life alone. Later, when the sun dipped below the horizon, Leonard's son called again. Leonard answered immediately. "Hi, Dad," his son said. His voice was warmer now, steadier, more open than before. "Hi," Leonard replied, voice soft. "I've been thinking about yesterday." "Me too," his son said. I want to see you more. Even just to talk." Leonard felt a lump in his throat. "I'd like that," he said. "We'll make it work." After the call ended, Leonard turned to Delilah. "I can't tell you how much this means," he said, voice thick with emotion. She smiled, the calm, quiet reassurance that had become his anchor. "I know," she said. "And you've earned it." For the first time in decades, Leonard allowed himself to feel that the future, though uncertain, held something worth investing in. A life with his son, a life with integrity, and a life with someone who reminded him that care was not weakness, it was courage. And as he settled into bed that night, Leonard realized that the test he had once devised for others had taught him the most important lesson of all, that trust, patience, and vulnerability were not optional, they were essential. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered, indifferent yet eternal, and Leonard felt a fragile but undeniable hope stirring inside him. The morning was crisp, almost chilly as Leonard slowly rose from his hospital bed. The previous weeks had left him physically fragile but emotionally alert. For the first time in decades, he felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to money, power, or control. It was tied to people, to connection. Delilah was already there, seated at the edge of his bed with a cup of coffee in her hand. "Good morning," she said softly, eyes attentive. "Morning," Leonard replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "I slept better than expected." "Good," she said. "Because today I think we take another important step." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Another step?" Delilah nodded. "You've spoken to your son, started reconnecting. But reconciliation isn't just about words, it's about action. About presence. Today we make it tangible." He swallowed, uncertain but willing. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Delilah smiled faintly. "We invite him here. To your home. The place where he grew up. The place where you've been hiding from so much of your own life." Leonard felt the weight of that suggestion immediately. His home had been his fortress for decades, pristine, controlled, untouchable. Inviting his son into it, opening doors he had long shut, felt both terrifying and necessary. I haven't seen him in years," Leonard admitted, "and I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You are," Delilah said calmly. "You've already started the hardest work, facing your mistakes. Now it's time to face the consequences of that honesty in person." The morning passed in preparation. Leonard's nurse came to check his vitals, and Delilah helped him dress carefully, attending to small details he had long ignored: the cuff of his sleeve, the tie, the crease of his trousers. Every movement reminded him that he was stepping back into a life he had abandoned, both physically and emotionally. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang. Leonard's pulse quickened. Delilah was beside him in the living room, quiet but steady. "It's him," she whispered. He took a slow breath, then opened the door. His son stood there, taller than Leonard remembered, more composed, yet the familiar vulnerability lingered in his eyes. He carried a small bag as if ready for a short visit, but also prepared for any confrontation. "Hi, Dad," his son said. "Hi," Leonard replied, voice low but steady. "Come in." The house was warm, familiar yet changed. Leonard watched as his son's eyes scanned the rooms, lingering on furniture, pictures, and the faint traces of his own childhood. Delilah moved silently around them, placing a cup of coffee in front of Leonard and offering a welcoming smile to his son. She did not interfere, she simply made the space safe. They sat together, hesitant at first. Conversation started slowly, but gradually memories began to surface. Shared birthdays, small lessons from childhood, moments of laughter and frustration long buried under years of distance. Leonard listened more than he spoke, letting his son guide the pace. Every word, every pause, every glance was a thread being woven into something new, something fragile but real. Hours passed. Afternoon light softened into evening, painting the room in golden hues. The tension slowly eased, replaced by tentative connection. Leonard realized that reconciliation was not instantaneous. It was a process built piece by piece, moment by moment. When his son finally stood to leave, he paused. "Thank you for today," he said, voice quieter, steadier. I appreciate the effort." Leonard nodded. "We'll continue," he said, "whenever you're ready." After the door closed, Leonard sank into his chair, chest heavy but lighter than it had been in years. Delilah moved beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "You did it," she said softly. "No," Leonard corrected, looking at her. "We did it." She smiled, a quiet affirmation of shared strength. "And there's still more to come," she said. Leonard leaned back, breathing deeply. He had crossed a threshold today, stepping into a future that was uncertain but filled with possibilities. And for the first time he felt that he was not facing it alone. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of evening. Leonard sat in his favorite armchair, a cup of tea cradled in his hands, the warmth seeping into his palms. Outside, the city lights twinkled faintly, indifferent to the weight of human stories unfolding within the walls. Delilah moved through the room with quiet precision, organizing papers and setting down small items that had been neglected during Leonard's hospital stay. Her presence was steady, grounding, a constant he had learned to rely on without fully realizing it until now. Leonard allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The past weeks had been a storm of emotions: fear, regret, hope, and a cautious joy. He had faced the consequences of absence, vulnerability, and mortality. He had spoken honestly with his son, listened to what was unspoken, and begun rebuilding something that years of pride and distance had nearly destroyed. The doorbell rang, cutting through the quiet. Leonard rose slowly, feeling the residual ache from his heart's recent scare, and opened the door. His son stood there, carrying a small box wrapped neatly. His face was open, the cautious distance from previous visits softened by trust that had begun to grow. "I brought something," his son said simply. "I thought, maybe we could start something new together." Leonard accepted the box, feeling the weight of both the physical object and the symbolic gesture. Inside were photographs, letters, and small mementos of the boy his son had once been and the young man he had become. They sat together at the table, unpacking memories, laughing quietly at familiar absurdities, pausing to reflect at moments that carried deeper meaning. Leonard noticed the subtle shifts in his son, the ease in his laughter, the openness in his questions, the willingness to share even after years of absence. Delilah observed from a short distance, her presence gentle, knowing that her role was not to intervene but to support. She quietly refilled Leonard's tea, offering a small smile that acknowledged the transformation taking place. Hours passed. Night settled outside, but inside, Leonard felt a warmth he had not experienced in decades. The house was no longer a fortress of solitude and control. It had become a space of connection, trust, and renewal. Finally, his son stood to leave. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice steady, sincere, "for taking the first steps. For showing me that it's possible to rebuild. Leonard nodded, his throat tight. We'll keep rebuilding, he replied. Together. As the door closed, Leonard sank back into his chair. He let the silence wash over him, no longer empty but filled with the promise of continued connection. Delilah approached, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. You've done more than I expected, she said softly. Leonard allowed himself a small, genuine smile. No, he said. We've done more than I ever thought possible. The night deepened, the city outside a canvas of muted light and distant sound. Leonard understood finally that life's true wealth was not in fortunes or power, but in the moments of courage, honesty, and love he had cultivated. And as he sat there, surrounded by the quiet testimony of connection, his son's presence, Delilah's steadfast support, and the knowledge that he had faced his past without fear, Leonard felt a sense of completion that was not final but enduring. He had passed the ultimate test, not one he had devised for someone else, but the one life had given him. He had chosen vulnerability over pride, presence over absence, and trust over fear. The future remained uncertain, as all futures do, but for the first time, Leonard faced it fully awake, fully present, and fully human. And for the first time in decades he was at peace.